2027, religion will once again continue to influence candidate selection, voter behavior, and campaign strategies. The Trump administration's claims that Nigeria is permitting targeted killings of Christians distracts from the broader issue of extremist violence and insecurity in the country. Since returning to civilian rule in 1999, Nigeria has been a major recipient of US security assistance, primarily aimed at counterterrorism. Despite this significant assistance, the extremist threat in Nigeria has worsened, expanding from the northeast, where Boko Haram has waged a 15-year insurgency, to the northwest, where so-called bandits are raiding villages. Most victims in both of these regions are Muslims. Since Boko Haram's emergence in 2009, Nigerian administrations, including the administration of President Tinubu, have struggled to improve security. And many Nigerians across the country acknowledge that the situation has only worsened in recent years. Therefore, narratives focusing solely on the killing of Christians often overlook Nigeria's broader insecurity and the fact that religion is usually a secondary factor in the violence. Recent violence in the Middle Belt predominantly affects Christian farming communities from various ethnic groups. Victims are mostly believed to be killed by Fulani herd Muslims. But the killings aren't explicitly motivated by religious reasons. While some community members actually describe the violence in their communities as genocidal, they often emphasize that the underlying causes are ethnic and material, such as land grabs, rather than on religious differences alone. Nevertheless, the high level of insecurity religious communities, including Christians, at risk. The failure to hold the perpetrators of these violent acts accountable has created both a sense of impunity among the attackers and a sense of grievance in the affected communities. Nigerian citizens have mixed reactions to the US redesignation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern. Many particular Christian groups welcome the attention, seeing it as a chance to push the Nigerian government to act against the violence. However, there are also concerns among many Nigerians, including Christians, that President Trump's threats of military action could also exacerbate existing political tensions. Public opinion surveys overall in Nigeria indicate a public consensus on the seriousness of the security challenges in the country, with many Nigerians valuing their diverse communities and believing in shared national unity over divisions. Now allow me to offer some concrete recommendations. First, to the United States government. It's important to engage deeply and broadly with communities across Nigeria. The US can play a constructive role, but it must avoid selective intervention and address the concerns of all Nigerians across all religions to prevent worsening sectarian divisions. Two, it's important to rethink reactive quick-win actions that may seem beneficial to Nigerians, but could have larger and far-reaching negative impacts. If the Trump administration proceeds with unilateral military action in Nigeria, it could endanger the Christians it aims to protect and worsens divisions along religious lines. Third, prioritize security governance to help tackle the violence. The US should reassess its security cooperation with Nigeria, focusing on building a program that prioritizes security governance and ties military support to tangible reforms. This renewed partnership should extend beyond military aid to include intelligence sharing, rule of law, and governance. 4, support local actors that are advancing inclusive peace and conflict resolution. Supporting moderate religious leaders and community networks in developing early warning systems can shift the focus from identity-based conflict to sustainable solutions. 5, work more with Nigeria's states and its growing city centers. The US government should decentralize its engagement with Nigeria by strengthening dialogue and support for receptive leaders at state and local levels, particularly in the Middle Belt, which is home to about 45 million people. The focus should be on local security to foster a safe environment for better government. It is important to appoint a Nigerian ambassador to the United States to improve its international engagement and manage narratives about its security realities. It's critical for President Tinubu to appoint a capable Nigerian ambassador to the US, as I also recommended in my testimony in March. Second, the Nigerian government needs to make accountability of both perpetrators and of the authorities central to the response. Nigerian citizens need justice, as criminality in the Middle Belt has increased due to impunity. The narrative of Christian genocide has gained traction because of years of mass killings without accountability, leaving many faith communities feeling abandoned. Third, Nigerian government needs to get serious about police reform. Nigeria's single federalized police force struggles to address the country's complex security challenges. The Tinubu administration needs to accelerate initiatives to improve citizen security, including the recruitment of 30,000 new police personnel he approved in June. The military in Nigeria is overextended. Many of them are handling duties that should be handled by the police. And it's essential to think about how the country reassigns police officers that are currently providing personal security to wealthy elites to focus more on the serious crimes. Next, coordinate federal and state action and messaging. Effective coordination so desperately needed among Nigeria's federal and state governments is often undermined by finger pointing, and this must stop. Finally, for the Nigerian government, it's important to start laying the groundwork for peaceful elections in 2027. Nigeria must address the use of religion as a trigger for electoral violence. The new leadership in its election commission presents a chance to restore public trust in the electoral system, promote responsible political behavior, and strengthen security and judicial processes. The violence in Nigeria has resulted in significant loss of life. However, addressing the country's complex security issues solely in religious terms and focusing on one group of victims is counterproductive. A fresh approach is needed both for Nigeria and the United States. Nigeria must tackle its institutional weaknesses in security, justice, and conflict prevention to effectively end the violence and hold perpetrators accountable. The US should engage in open dialogue and cooperation, fostering a better understanding of Nigeria's complexities. Both countries can leverage current diplomatic tensions to strengthen their bilateral relationship and collaboratively address the wider threats of jihadist violence in Nigeria and the surrounding West Africa and Sahel region, as both nations have vital interests at stake. Thank you again for inviting me to testify, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you so very much for your testimony. We do have a video I'd like to show. This is of Mrs. Akpen.
Nigeria. I am here with one of the survivors of the Yelwater massacre of 13th of June 2025 here in Nigeria, where we lost over 200 lives in a single night. So she is here to be witness as one of the survivors of that grave attack. So we'll listen to her. That her name is Nsoshima Akpen. That when they went into sleep that fateful night, around 9 p.m., the Fulani terrorists attacked them where they were sleeping. that they were locked inside the camp at Yilwata, and they were butchering them with cutlasses and shooting guns as well. When they thought all had finished at some point in time, they poured petrol on the building, and most of them, majority of them, were set ablaze. That in the course of this action, she saw a tree up when she lifted up her eyes, and she raised her hands, head on the tree, climbed up where she was able to hit herself. That her 5 children that she left below were crying, and in her presence, they were being slaughtered by the terrorists.
Okay.
That she ran out into the bush at some point, and those who came for rescue would now bring her out of that place at some point, and she was able to witness the whole drama. And when the people came, they were now relocated to a new camp. So thank you very much. This is the much we can receive from Msoshima Akwen. God bless you.
Thank you very much. And we now go to questions. Let me just ask, on one of my trips to Nigeria, I did visit the Fusion Center, which there was a great deal of cooperation beginning. And I mentioned that our ambassador, Mike Waltz, to the United Nations was actually deployed there as a Green Beret and part of a special forces training component. There was a great hesitancy on the part of our government to engage that to the degree that would really make a difference. And I'll tell you what they told me. They said that they were worried about the applying the Leahy law so that we do not fund or train human rights violators. So believing that, I actually asked, I had a hearing, and Ed Royce did a hearing on the full committee, and we asked the Undersecretary of State under the Obama administration how many Nigerians could be trained. And she said, matter of factly, half. We don't need half, but a large number, half would be, that could be trained in counterinsurgency. They wanted night vision goggles, they wanted intel to track down Boko Haram and these other then emerging groups, ISIS West Africa, for example, and it never really materialized the way it could have. Now, one of the hopes I have, and we hope many of us have, coming out of this, will be that there will be a renewed effort to, again, support human rights trained people, men and women who are not accused, and certainly that is a very difficult thing to prove one way or the other. The Leahy law is very hard to implement. And I sat through an actual session with a Foreign Service officer in Abuja as he went through names, and just to get a sense of how robust the effort is. Very, very hard to do. But again, so many can be trained. And I think what we are hoping will come out of this, in addition to a whole lot of other things, is a very highly trained counterinsurgency force that will take it to Boko Haram, the Fulani terrorists, and others. I note that just today, there's a report that just came out that the president is not going to a G20 meeting, and I said, think of us as partners, and you may not like it, but we're doing it because we care about the people in your country that are being slaughtered, both Christians and Muslims. So your thoughts on really getting this cooperation off the ground? When I was there, I talked to a lot of people, and I followed up once I got here. And they had all these recommendations, only a few, if any, were ever carried forward with, and that's unfortunate. Some were, but I think a top-to-bottom review of what can be done, what does it take, and then meanwhile, on the humanitarian side, and we asked this last night, and Mr. Rosenga asked this as well of our two witnesses from the administration, you know, the government really needs to do more for its IDPs. It has not. But we want to be helpful there too, you know, making sure that food, medicine, shelter is available to them. So the IDP camps that I've been in were awful. One was an old hotel that was just, you know, makeshift turned into an IDP, and that was probably one of the better ones. So your thoughts on that, on really helping Nigeria to help themselves?
Well, I think that that is important. That's the way to get this, to tackle this problem once and for all. I think that President Trump has instilled at least some political will on behalf of the government to, within the government of Nigeria, to take some action. And it's absolutely essential to do this, both because religious freedom is a pillar of U.S. foreign policy. It's in compliance with the International Religious Freedom Act, which requires the president to review every foreign country to decide whether or not to designate it as a CPC, and that annually, and the year is ending, so it was appropriate that President Trump do that again. It's going to help alleviate just unfathomable human suffering, as we've seen in that mother's eyes today, to halt Nigeria's descent into failed state status and avert possible civil war, and not to deepen the spread of terror across West Africa. It's absolutely essential that Nigeria's government start engaging in the security of its own people. And again, there has been some willingness, political will, to fight the terror groups in the north, but there hasn't been any prosecution, so far successful prosecution, of any one from the Fulani militias at all. So I think that that's...
Just say that again for emphasis. There has not been, with the Fulani militias, efforts to...
So there hasn't been, and then that is, I think, more of a police work, and you know, warfare is very different now. There's human intelligence is getting rarer and rarer. There's you know, drone intelligence and other forms of technological methods. But I think that it's actually a relatively easy problem to solve, relatively. And it should start with that, and simultaneously actually work on the, and help, you know, locate Leah Sharibu, you mentioned, and the Chibok schoolgirls that are still enslaved. You mentioned, Mr. Chairman, that there was intelligence sharing in the past, but nothing happened. I think that was a prime case of that, and that should be pursued. And can be pursued, again, fairly easily with modern technology. And it should happen across the country, including in the north. There should be cooperation and work on the terror groups, and sealing the border, and sharing our experience with that. President Trump's been very good with that. And we have a lot to impart, and if the government of Nigeria is willing, I think it would benefit all of us and the region.
Thank you very much. I think, you know, consecutive U.S. administrations have defined or described the relationship with Nigeria as one of its most important on the continent. And even though that relationship has been complicated with, you know, periods of friction, I think this moment that we find ourselves in seems as if all things have aligned, and there is an opportunity now for both the U.S. and Nigeria to come to the table to reset that relationship. especially given the fact that citizens across the board in Nigeria, every data point you look at, there's overwhelming acknowledgement that the levels of insecurity in the country are unacceptable. I think the fact that we have this coming from Nigerian citizens provides the opportunity to have real serious conversation based on concrete benchmarks for progress. The mistake that would be made is if it is seen as being a selective intervention favoring one group over the other. So there is an opportunity for Nigeria and the US to reset its relationship, one that would really be based on listening to the Nigerian people. And Nigerians are saying levels of insecurity are very high. How do we address it? So this opportunity now provides leverage to the US, working with the Nigerian government to actually show some very clear progress.
Okay, thank you very much. I would point out, and this is worth noting, because I was always perplexed with Secretary Blinken, and I asked him at hearings just like this, why he withdrew CPC, and I never got a good answer. But when we were doing the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, I held all the hearings, most of them in this room. And John Shattuck, who was the Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, testified against it for the Clinton administration. On the record, I have all the records, you could go look at it. He said it would create a hierarchy of human rights, which is nonsense. And I even, in my response to him at one of the hearings, was to say, okay, I was all for combating apartheid, which was not a very popular thing within my party in the very beginning of the Reagan administration, and I was all for it. Did that take away any other human rights work we were doing? It was not in lieu of, it was in addition to what we were doing in any other area of human rights work. And I said the same thing about religious freedom. It is a pillar of our Constitution. It's a pillar of our, it's really a universally recognized human right. But they said it would set. 1 year later, I had a hearing on did it do that? And I had the Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom testify, because they were all saying, Shattuck especially, it would make everything worse on religious freedom. And the word back was, even after 1 year, it was seriously advancing religious freedom. Ditto on trafficking. I was told by Harold Coe, the Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, right from where we're sitting right now, that most of what was in my Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 would be counterproductive. We don't need a tip office. We don't need all of the dozens of new programs that were unleashed by that law. And it was a bipartisan law. Sam Gagenson, who sat right here with me. It was my bill, but he was our principal co-sponsor, and we really worked together to get it passed. And he was from Connecticut. And again, as we went over year and after that, it was like, yeah, it really did help. But it was stopped in its tracks had we listened to that argument. Blinken was a part of that on the religious freedom back then. And I always felt, I could be wrong, that there was a sense that the Religious Freedom Act was not something he was terribly enamored of. So it was very easy to get rid of the CPC status for him, because he did not give a good answer when asked directly by me, and I wasn't the only one, where you sit, Nina, why? What's the why of it? And at one point he told the appropriators that there's none of this has anything to do with religious freedom, you know, in terms of the violence. Really, it just doesn't pass a straight face test. So you know, that's, in my humble opinion, one of the reasons why we had such, again, and I remind everybody, it was Clinton who signed the International Religious Freedom Act. And we didn't know if he was going to do it. At the very end, we did have veto-proof majorities to overcome a veto. But that said, he did sign it, and I'm forever grateful for that. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Onumbogu, thank you for testifying again before the committee today. As you know, President Trump, in his November 1st Truth Social post on Nigeria, threatened to deploy the U.S. military guns blazing into Nigeria to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists there, stating that if we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet. All of those are quotes. Do you believe unilateral U.S. military strikes in Nigeria would make the situation more or less safe for Nigerian citizens?
I believe it will make it less safe.
Can you elaborate on why?
Because all the data points show us that Nigerians value diverse societies. But even as they value diverse societies, there are also experiences where overwhelmingly there are low levels of trust. Already just from the threats that have been made, we're already seeing, especially if you go on social media, people basically forming camps and basically coming up with different conspiracy theories about what is feeding the threats that have been made by the president. So I think it's important to understand the complexities of Nigeria and understand
this happening already in Nigeria. You mentioned it in your opening statement that this was a risk. Could you expand on this and explain how inflammatory rhetoric can make tensions within communities even worse and actually lead to the very violence and targeting that this administration says it's trying to counter?
So as I mentioned, because of the low levels of trust that we see in communities, all we have to do is date back to several conflicts that have occurred over time in different parts of Nigeria. And we've seen how some of them have been driven by conspiracy theories or hearsays. And in many ways, rhetoric like this could actually be detrimental because it moves us farther away from finding a real solution to the problem. All we have to do is just look at over the last few weeks since the threats were made and to just listen to all the different conversations and discussions happening. None of them have actually come out with real solutions from the side of the Nigerian government or from civil society or the international community. Everyone is all focused on what has been said. So it moves us farther from finding solutions, and especially in environments like those in the middle belt, where we've seen protracted conflicts. Time and time again, as you engage in these communities, you realize that while people live together, there are very low levels of trust. And it's extremely important that we keep that in mind, because very little things can inflame tensions that already exist in the country.
Thank you. You've talked a lot about this deficit of trust, lack of trust, about the sort of crisis of governance in Nigeria. How should Nigeria fix this problem, and how should the United States work with Nigeria to address it? Like, what would you advocate as the type of diplomatic actions and U.S. investments that would make sense here?
I think most importantly, for this situation, Nigeria needs to take the lead and literally summon the utmost political will in this regard. As I mentioned in my testimony, a lot of these narratives have continued because people, Nigerians are not getting the justice that they deserve. And unfortunately, it's breeding an environment where there's a sense of impunity, where those who carry out attacks, regardless of what religion they come from, they feel they can continue those attacks. And then the communities, there's a sense of grievance where at the end of the day, if they feel that the government isn't coming to their aid, they come up with their own narratives. So at the end of the day, there needs to be an acknowledgement on the part of the Nigerian government. Nigeria needs to take the lead. Nigerian leaders need to summon the political will and work with their allies and partners, such as the United States, to be able to address this violence. You know, at the end of the day, we may put up numbers there and talk about the numbers of victims, but it's important for us to put a face to these numbers. The violence has gone on for so long in Nigeria. So Nigeria needs to take the lead, work in partnership with allies such as the US, and there is a moment here, there is an opportunity here for folks to come to the table to really find a sustainable solution to this problem.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. And Ms. Shea, appreciate you highlighting the issue of the disarmament of Fulani militants. I think that certainly would be one of these solutions. Obviously, there's not a singular one. It's a multifaceted problem that's going on here in different regions of the country, and there's a lot of complexities to it. But as we've heard, I think, a couple times here, and I do agree with, there is an opportunity here for the Nigerian government to strengthen, deepen, and broaden their relationship with the United States if they will do that in coordination and cooperation with the United States government. When I met with the delegation, as Mr. Smith met with them as well, that was one of the messages that I gave to them, is that there is an opportunity here, but you're going to have to take that opportunity. And I am very hopeful that they will do that, because myself and Chairman Smith and President Trump, we've had enough of this. This cannot continue to go on in the manner that it has, and it now has the president's attention. And I do agree that, you know, you get all this kind of information flying around out here that many times is not helpful. I recently saw the foreign minister was in some interview, I think it was Piers Morgan, and it was the same thing when they came here and some of us spoke to them, just disputing these numbers, right? I think the foreign minister said in the last 5 years, there's only 177 Christians have been killed. I don't think there's anybody that believes that, right? And I don't think that it's necessarily constructive on their part to try to downplay what's happening here. But Ms. Shea, I'd ask you, how do you think about the differences, though, in between some of these statistics that have been reported? Obviously, have non-governmental organizations that, it seems to me, have robust on-the-ground informational networks, and those offered by the Nigerian government. How do we have such a huge disparity in the numbers in between what we're saying, or what some of these groups on the ground are saying, and then the foreign minister saying there's 177 Christians killed in the entire country of Nigeria over the last 5 years? That which is just hard to believe. It seems that number was achieved likely in just the last couple months, but please.
Yes, you're right. It's a huge disparity, and assuming it's not just propaganda, one of the reasons why there is a range of numbers for any particular event is that precisely because the government doesn't do any police work. So there's no one that comes in to prevent it, or to, during its occurrence, to stop it, or in the immediate aftermath. So the witnesses have fled for their lives. There's chaos. There's destruction everywhere. The evidence has been tampered.
GoDaddy has the perfect hosting.
Pastors and priests who are the ones there taking the body counts, helping the survivors. It's very difficult for them to do that job and at the same time do documentation. They do it as best as they can, but the numbers are far larger than that foreign minister is saying. I also want to say that I think that President Trump's designation of CPC has been extremely important. He has gotten the attention of the government of Nigeria. We've heard that there's a high-level delegation in Washington today discussing this with the United States.
I met with them yesterday.
Yeah, so I think that this has been a very beneficial exercise thus far. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. And we've heard several people mention early warning systems, and I do agree with that. I think that those can be helpful. But I do want to highlight a case that just happened recently in the Plateau State. We had a pastor there who had warned the Nigerian government and said, we are under imminent threat. We are going to face an attack if you all don't send some forces here in the next 24 hours. We need help. Please come here and help us. The Nigerian government not only ignored it, they literally put out a press release about it, calling it fake news and hyperbole and being overblown. Well, 13 people lost their lives the next day. 13 people murdered. Christians murdered. I don't know how much an early warning system is going to work, if people aren't listening to warnings that are literally over the phone. I'm not sure. So I'd say to the Nigerian government, you're going to have to, and we keep using the term, prioritize this because it's certainly a priority for President Trump. And I think many of us on this panel here today on this issue in the middle belt of the country is distinctly different from what you face with Boko Haram and ISIS in the northeast of the country, and that's probably more of a question of kinetic military options rather than some of the other things that maybe State Department could do more in the middle belt, backed up by some of those same type of at least military deterrence options in that part of the country. But I think it does need to be a kind of whole of government approach to this, but we have to have the Nigerian government as a willing partner in all of this, because the president is, as Chairman Smith just said, extremely serious about this. I'm extremely serious about this. I stay up at night. It's hard to sleep sometimes thinking about this, and I pray about it every single night, just thinking about, my own brothers and sisters in Christ in that country just getting murdered for the profession of their faith, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So it is absolutely heartbreaking. But I do want to thank the chairman again for convening this hearing, as he has over the many years and been working to advocate for the people of Nigeria. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Very much, Mr. Moore, and thank you for your leadership. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your leadership. To Mr. Onugbu, what do you see as the primary drivers of religious freedom violations in Nigeria? And secondly, what are the political, economic, social, and historical factors that exacerbate